My mom placed her hand on the edge of the table, like she was pinning me there, holding me in place without actually touching me. Then she looked straight at me, eyes cold and steady, and said, "Calm yourself, Rachel. You're not getting a single cent." The room didn't move. Not a breath, not a shift, not a blink. Just that sentence echoing in my skull like it had been launched straight at the center of me. Erin smirked. Mia hid a smile behind her wine glass. Something inside me slipped. Not snapped, slipped. Quietly, like a knot loosening after years of strain. I set my fork and knife down slowly, carefully, like I was laying a fragile object to rest. "All right," I whispered. "Then don't expect a cent from me either." I thought that moment was the betrayal. I really did. I thought that was the blow. But they didn't know the real hit was still coming. I drove to my parents' house that night, telling myself it was just dinner. Just a quiet evening in suburban Bend, Oregon. 40 minutes from where I lived in Redmond. Lasagna and small talk. The kind of warmth I used to pretend still existed between us. The sky was already dark when I pulled into their driveway, porch light glowing like a welcome I didn't fully believe. I should have noticed the tension the moment I stepped inside, the stillness in the air, my mom barely glancing up from the oven, the way Erin and Mia exchanged one of those quick, secret smiles they'd been trading since childhood. But I told myself not to overthink it. I always told myself that. Inside, the house smelled like garlic, tomatoes, and the lemon cleaner my mom used every Saturday morning without fail. It was familiar, almost comforting, the exact kind of familiarity that blinds you. I hung my coat on the same hook I'd used since high school and stepped into the dining room. The table was set perfectly. Cloth napkins, wine glasses, candles already lit. That alone should have warned me. My parents only put that level of effort in when something was coming, something big or something bad. My stomach tightened. "Rachel, you made it," my mom said without turning around, her tone bright but her shoulders stiff. My dad gave me a short nod, the kind he used when he didn't want to talk but felt obligated to acknowledge me. Aaron was spreading butter on a roll like he was performing for an invisible audience. Mia sat beside him, tapping her phone screen in that idle, superior way she had, the glow highlighting her glossy hair. "Big city sister finally joins us," Mia murmured without looking up. I ignored her. I'd been ignoring comments like that for years. We sat down. My mom placed the lasagna in the center of the table and forced a smile, but the atmosphere felt delicate, thin, stretched too tight, like the slightest touch would make it snap. Conversation started awkwardly. Weather, work, the typical filler words families use when they have nothing real left to say. My mom asked about my latest project. My dad mumbled something about needing help with a leaky pipe. The twins whispered to each other like children sharing secrets under a blanket. But underneath all of it was something else, something waiting for its cue. As I cut into my food, I caught my mom watching me, calculating, weighing. The same look she gave me every time she handed me another family expense. Mortgage payments, utility bills, surprise repairs, medical copays, college tuition when Erin changed majors 3 times, new equipment for Mia's photography dreams she never stuck with, the lake cabin they all loved but never maintained. Every one of those bills had been quietly transferred from my account because I was the responsible one, because the oldest daughter takes care of everyone else, because that's what family meant in our house, my labor, their comfort. I used to think helping them meant I mattered. Now it felt like every sacrifice evaporated the moment it left my hands. My mom cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "Rachel, you're glad you're here tonight. There's something important your father and I want to talk about." Aaron straightened in his seat. Mia locked her phone, setting it face down, her smirk already forming like she'd been rehearsing it all day. My heart dipped, just a little, but enough to warn me. My mom didn't reach for her fork. She reached for the folder beside her plate. A thin stack of papers clipped neatly on the top corner, already creased from being handled. She rested her palm on it like she was staking a claim. "Rachel," she said, tone bright in that artificially sweet way that always made my skin prickle. "Your father and I finalized the will. We wanted you to hear it directly from us." The room shifted, the candles flickered, even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade. My dad kept his eyes fixed on the table. Aaron leaned back smugly, folding his arms. Mia tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, watching me like she was studying my reaction for entertainment. My heart thudded once, heavy. "The will?" I echoed. "Yes," my mother continued, sliding the folder toward me. "It's all very straightforward. The house, the late cabin, what's left in our savings, everything will go to Aaron and Mia." The words hit so bluntly, so casually, that for a moment my mind refused to process them. I blinked at her, at the folder, at the way she said everything like she was discussing tomorrow's weather. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely audible. "What?" "You're doing well on your own," she replied smoothly. "You don't need anything from us. Your siblings, however, could use the support. They're still finding their direction." Finding their direction. That direction apparently was paved with the money I'd spent covering their lives. Aaron smirked wider. "Just wanted to avoid confusion later." Mia's smile sharpened. "You always land on your feet, Rachel. Some of us aren't that lucky." A bitter laugh rose in my throat but got stuck somewhere behind my teeth. I said, "So let me get this straight," I said quietly. "I paid the mortgage every month. I covered the bills. I paid for Aaron to hop through majors like they were seasonal hobbies. I paid to fix the cabin so everyone could enjoy their summers, and I get nothing." My mom sighed dramatically. "This is exactly why we didn't want to tell you yet. You always bring it back to money." "Because I'm the only one bringing money," I said, my voice trembling not with fear but with truth finally breaking through. My dad finally spoke, barely above whisper. "Rachel, sweetheart, you're stable, you live comfortably, you'll be fine." I stared at him, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who tied my shoes, who once lifted me onto his shoulders. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Mia shrugged. "Maybe if you weren't always trying to be the hero, you wouldn't be so upset." Aaron chuckled. "Seriously? Nobody forced you to help." "No one forced me." Those words hit harder than they should have. Years of sacrifice reframed as optional. Something inside me didn't crack, it solidified. I smiled. Not bitterly, not angrily, just done. "All right," I said softly. "Then don't expect a cent from me either." The table went still. Even the air seemed to freeze. I folded my napkin neatly, placing it beside my untouched plate. Then I stood. Their faces blurred behind me as I walked down the hallway toward the door. They thought the will was the betrayal. They had no idea what they had just started. They had no idea what they had just started. The drive back to Redmond felt longer than it should have, like the highway had been stretched between towns overnight, each mile marker a small test of my calm. Rain started to spit across the windshield, turning streetlights into long, trembling lines of gold and orange. But I hardly noticed. My mother's voice, calm, practiced, precise, kept looping in my head. "You're not getting a single cent." It sounded less like a sentence and more like a verdict. By the time I pulled up to my apartment building, a hollow ache had settled under my ribs, the kind that lives just beneath your lungs and makes every breath feel borrowed. I dropped my keys on the small table by the door with a clatter that sounded too loud in the otherwise quiet hallway. The heater hummed its steady domestic song. A half-burned vanilla candle sat stubbornly on the counter, a scent I'd lit the night before to feel like myself. Nothing felt like mine anymore. I sat on the couch and stared at my phone face down. It vibrated once, twice, then kept going until it buzzed itself purple. 9 missed calls, 4 voicemails, 3 texts from my mother, 1 from Aaron, 1 from Mia. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I unlocked my banking app. The screen loaded, and there it was. Recurring payments listed in neat little lines. Mortgage, utilities, transfers labeled help, family. Little bland descriptors that disguised a decade of work and worry. My thumb hovered over the first line for a long time. I breathed in, slowly, the way you do before you step up to something you know will hurt, but also set you free. Then I tapped cancel. The confirmation popped up. Cancel recurring payment. Yes or no. My thumb pressed yes. The page refreshed. Another payment. Cancel, confirm. Another. Cancel, confirm. It didn't feel like triumph. It was quieter than that, like closing a door gently after you finally decide to leave a room you were never meant to stay in. My phone buzzed once. My mother. "Rebecca,"
she began, voice immediately sharp with disbelief and then anger. "What are you doing? Don't you dare cancel those transfers. You're acting like a child." I looked at the rain tracing lines down the window. My reflection faint. "I'm not your bank," I said, voice steady. She inhaled like she was trying to find the right performance. "You're part of this family." "And family doesn't treat each other like this," I answered. There was a silence, and then, "Call me when you've calmed down." She hung up. 2 minutes later, Aaron called, voice thinned with irritation and a brittle sort of bravado. "So Mom says you're freaking out over what? You always do this, act like you're saving us all." He tried to make me small, tried to make the truth look like arrogance. "You volunteered your help. No one forced you." Those words, "no one forced you," hit harder than he intended. Years of lending myself and being told I was noble suddenly sounded like a mistake to him. I blocked the call. Mia tried next, voice syrupy with faux concern. "Beck, think about what you're doing. This could ruin Aaron. You could ruin family." I muted the notification and then blocked her too. I blocked my mother after that. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a clean, decisive line drawn across a page. The next few days fell into a new rhythm. Work, silence, pockets of relief. My coworkers noticed I looked tired, but didn't pry. I was grateful for that small mercy. I threw myself into a project that demanded long hours and travel, anything that kept my attention away from the dining room table, away from my mother's neat hand on the wheel, away from Aaron's smirk. 3 weeks after that dinner, my phone lit up with a group text from my mother. "Family meeting tonight. You owe it to us to be there." Old programming wrapped itself around my chest like a familiar scarf, warm and choking. But I typed one word: "Fine." When I pulled into my parents' driveway that evening, the sky was the color of a bruise, flat, dull gray that promised rain. Aaron's truck sat crooked in the driveway. Mia leaned against the porch railing, scrolling through her phone with an expression that said she was ready to watch a spectacle. My father stood beside the door, hands jammed into his pockets, eyes like a man waiting out a storm he did not want to get wet by. My mother waited just inside, arms crossed, face that practiced look of disappointment. They all looked at me like I was the problem. They had no idea I wasn't the same person who had left 3 weeks earlier. I was someone who had stopped measuring herself in other people's needs. I was someone who decided not to be the family's unpaid utility anymore. Weeks later, the real nightmare arrived, not like a dramatic act, but with the cold, precise cruelty of someone trying to make a point. I'd just flown back from a client site in Sacramento, suitcase clattering against the hall tiles as I came up the stairs. I was bone tired, eyes gritty from travel, wanting nothing more than a shower and sleep. Halfway down the corridor, something felt off. The air smelled wrong, sharp and chemical, a thin sting at the back of my throat. Then I saw my door. It looked swollen, bulging at the seams as if something had been stuffed into it. Expanding foam, thick, yellowed, dried solid, had been hammered into every crack around the frame. It bulged outward in ugly, crusty waves. My keys slid uselessly. Lock wouldn't turn. For a moment, I stood there, steadying my breath. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I felt a shallow, deliberate calm pool in my belly, like someone had filled a cup with cool water to douse a fever. I called building management. It took nearly an hour for anyone to come. When the supervisor finally arrived, he stood a respectful distance away and whistled softly through his teeth. Someone wanted to make sure you couldn't get back in. The locksmith took another 2 hours to chip the foam away without wrecking the door. Dried flakes of insulation crunched under my shoes like confetti from a party no one wanted to attend. When the door finally gave and I stepped inside, I didn't cry. I walked straight to my laptop, pulled up the hallway camera feed, and scrolled through until I found the footage. Fast forward, pause, play. There he was, Aaron. Hood pulled up over his head, a baseball cap low, that stupid grin he'd thought made him charming. He moved like he owned the space, shaking a can of foam with that same careless swagger I had watched him have since he was a kid. He sprayed every inch of the frame, then stepped back to admire his work like he'd painted a masterpiece. His face wasn't perfectly visible, but his posture, the jacket he wore last Christmas, the way he loped when he walked, unmistakable. I didn't gasp. I didn't shake. I saved the clip. Then I called my aunt, Aunt Nora. She arrived in 20 minutes, slippers and robe, worry already carved into her face. One look at the doorframe and her jaw set. Inside, I showed her the footage. She watched every second with a hard, steady expression. When it ended, she nodded once, the kind of single, small movement that carried the weight of someone who had seen the pattern before. "He crossed the line, Rachel," she said. "You can't keep absorbing this." It wasn't encouragement. It was a statement of fact. The next morning, I filed a police report. I was calm, factual, an inventory of vandalism and intimidation. The officer watched the footage twice, then rubbed his forehead. "Someone wanted to make a point," he said. "You did the right thing coming in." My mother's calls started again. This time, rage threaded thinly under a film of disbelief. "How could you do this to your brother?" she demanded. "Do you know what you've started?" I answered evenly, "No, Mom. He started it when he vandalized my home." She didn't accept the logic. She dropped the line about family and duty and how we take care of each other. It dissolved into accusations and then a slammed phone. My father called after that. Quieter, more strategic. "Let's fix this quietly," he said. "No need to escalate." "It already escalated," I replied. "He broke the law." He sighed. "You're punishing him." "I'm holding him accountable," I said. He had no comeback. 2 days later, he called again. Different tone. "What do you want?" he asked. The wrong question, always. "I want the repairs reimbursed," I said. "Everything." He balked. "That's outrageous." "That's the number," I replied. "Or the report stays." He muttered something, hung up. The transfer hit my account the next morning, exactly the amount I'd listed. The memo line read, "Settlement." For a long time, I just stared at the digits, not satisfied, not gleeful, just unburdened. The money wasn't the victory. The boundary was. Later that evening, my mother called one last time. Her voice cracked, not with sadness, but with anger. "You've destroyed this family," she spat. I stepped onto my balcony and felt the chill of Portland's night air scrape across my face. I thought of all the nights I had stayed awake, waiting for a call or a crisis, financing futures that never thanked me. "No," I said, and I meant it. I stopped letting this family destroy me. She inhaled, then said, "I hope someday you'll understand." I smiled at the cold and replied, "I do." Then I ended the call. In the quiet of my apartment that night, I ran my hand over the newly repaired doorframe, smooth, clean, unmarked. It felt like a symbol, yes, but it also felt like something practical, a barrier I had every right to maintain. In the weeks after, my life shifted in ways I hadn't expected, small at first, and then with the momentum that felt like the first deep breath after years of shallow ones. There were no more midnight calls demanding explanations, no guilt-laden voicemails, no manipulative lectures disguised as concern. It was, astonishingly, just silence. The updates on my family didn't come from them anymore. They came from Aunt Nora, who checked in with me every few days. Aaron drifted between jobs, blaming stress, blaming whatever he could without looking inward. Mia floated from project to project, none of them sticking. Their crises no longer swallowed me. They were theirs, not mine to solve. Meanwhile, my own life began to expand. Work felt lighter. My manager noticed and brought me on a leadership track I'd been too exhausted to accept before. I slept through the night again. I learned to eat without the nervous rush chewing that comes from always being on call. I booked a 2-week trip to Italy with the reimbursement money, not out of spite, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I could choose something for me without asking permission. Florence was warm and golden in a way my hometown never was. Every evening I stood on a tiny balcony and let the light unwind the knots inside me. I returned different in small ways that mattered. I joined a hiking group, and on my second Saturday out, met Alex. Steady, unassuming, quick to laugh. He didn't know the family story at first. He just listened like I was a full, complicated person, not a resource to be tapped. Sometimes, late at night, old echoes would ripple through me, soft and transient, but they no longer defined the edges of my life. What surprised me most was that I didn't miss them. Not really. What I missed was the version of myself who had believed love meant erasing parts of myself to fill others. She was gone. In her place stood someone who had learned to build borders, to collect oxygen by taking space for herself. I hadn't lost a home. I had walked out of a battlefield. If you've ever carried everyone else until you couldn't breathe, know this. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. If this story lands with you, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.